Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at peacemaking.
Peacemaking.
Yeah, but not the kind you're probably thinking of. Not just treaties and handshakes.
Right.
We're going way deeper.
Yeah.
Like, how can sports or religion, even things like psychotherapy, help build peace?
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating stuff.
It is.
And to guide us through this, we're diving into Brian C. Alston's introduction to Visions in Conflict.
Great book.
It is. And it really gets you thinking differently about how we approach conflict resolution.
Definitely. And Alston really emphasizes this idea that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to conflict.
Right.
The world is messy, and so responding to conflict is going to be messy too.
Makes sense.
It's not just about
Yeah.
ending a war. It's about rebuilding lives and trust, rebuilding societies.
Yeah, it's like when you have a fight with a close friend,
Right.
just saying sorry isn't enough. You have to actually put in the work to repair that relationship.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that really struck me in Alston's intro was the idea of using sports for peace building. He mentions the Olympic truce
Right.
being the longest standing peace accord in history, which is incredible when you think about it.
It is.
For centuries, nations have set aside their differences, at least for a little while, for these games.
Right.
So how does that actually work? How does that translate to building real peace in the world?
Well, sports can provide a sense of normalcy and a shared goal.
Okay.
Especially for kids who've grown up around conflict. The Norwegian Refugee Council has found that sports programs are super beneficial in these situations.
I can see that.
They give kids a safe place to play and to process trauma and to build relationships with others who might have been on the other side not too long ago. So it's not just fun and games. It's about healing and rebuilding communities.
Powerful stuff. And then there's religion, which Alston also talks about.
Right.
Now, that might seem a little counterintuitive at first because, religion is often seen as a source of conflict.
Sure.
But he makes this interesting point that religion can actually be a powerful force for peace.
Yeah, especially when it's not the root of the conflict itself. Because religion provides things like a sense of purpose, a moral framework, even tools like confession and forgiveness.
Okay.
All things that can be incredibly helpful in the aftermath of violence. To help individuals and communities heal.
Makes you wonder if we can somehow apply those tools in other contexts too.
Maybe.
Like even for people who aren't religious, is there a way to tap into those mechanisms of forgiveness and reconciliation?
That's a good question.
And speaking of finding common ground, Alston also talks about the importance of education. He says that the way we learn about conflict has really evolved. It's not just about studying wars and battles anymore.
Right.
It's about understanding the root causes of conflict, learning how to prevent it and manage it, promoting a culture of peace.
Exactly.
So it's not just about learning about conflict, but learning how to be peacemakers ourselves.
Right. It's going beyond just the textbooks.
Exactly. And Alston points out that there are all these training programs around the world now that are equipping people with the skills to be mediators, to facilitate dialogue, to help communities rebuild.
Yeah.
And these programs often bring together people from different sides of a conflict.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is, like those inter-religious workshops he mentions, where people from different faiths come together,
Right.
share their experiences, and learn to see the world through each other's eyes. Have you ever come across any particularly striking examples of how these kinds of programs have made a difference?
Oh yeah, there's one in the Middle East that brings together Israeli and Palestinian teenagers.
Wow.
And a lot of these kids come from families that have been deeply affected by the conflict. But through this program, they're building friendships, challenging their own prejudices. They start to see each other as human beings rather than enemies.
That's incredible.
It is.
And it really makes you think if it can work for them, teenagers who've grown up in a conflict zone, could it work for us in our everyday lives?
Well, I think it can. And, Alston talks about these 4 levels of intervention.
Right. Kellerman's 4 levels.
Yeah, exactly. And those can apply to any conflict, really.
Oh, that's right. I remember him mentioning those. Can you remind me what they are again?
Sure. So the first level is all about creating a safe space for people to just express their emotions.
Okay.
Like when you're in a heated argument, sometimes you just need to vent a little before you can actually have a productive conversation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like an emotional release valve or something.
Exactly. And then the second level is about correcting those distorted perceptions. Because we all see the world through our own lenses, right? And those lenses can be clouded by all sorts of things: prejudice, misinformation, past experiences.
So it's about helping people to see things more clearly.
Yeah, challenging those assumptions, considering other perspectives.
Like putting on a new pair of glasses.
Exactly. And then the third level focuses on improving communication. So this is where you start to build bridges, find common ground, figure out ways to work together.
So this builds on the previous level then, right? Because once you've cleared up those distorted perceptions, you can actually start talking to each other.
Exactly. And then finally, the fourth level looks at the broader context of the conflict.
Okay.
So this is where you start to address those systemic issues that might be fueling the conflict.
Yeah.
Things like inequality, discrimination, historical injustices.
Wow, so it's like realizing that the argument you're having is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, there's all this stuff underneath that needs to be dealt with if you want to find real peace.
It makes you think about how I approach conflict in my own life. You know, I tend to just focus on finding a solution, like right away. But maybe sometimes you need to take a step back and address those deeper issues.
It's definitely something to consider. And, you know, Alston also brings up the psychological side of conflict.
Yeah.
He talks about the work of Herbert Kellman. And Kellman argues that we need to pay attention to those psychological factors that are driving the conflict, both on an individual and a collective level.
So it's not just about countries fighting, it's about the people within those countries.
Exactly. Their motivations, their fears, their traumas, all of that plays a role.
I never thought about it that way. So you're saying that understanding people's psychology could actually be key to resolving conflict.
Absolutely. Think about trauma, for example. Victims of violence carry deep emotional scars.
Right.
And that can lead to anger, resentment, a desire for revenge.
And it's not just the victims, right?
Yeah.
What about the people who perpetrate the violence?
Exactly. They often have their own traumas and psychological wounds. Their actions might stem from unhealed pain or a sense of powerlessness or even a distorted sense of justice.
So everyone involved is carrying their own baggage.
Right. And those stories shape their actions, their perceptions, the whole course of the conflict.
And that brings us to one of the most challenging things Alston talks about, the cycle of violence. He says that violence often begets more violence, like a self-perpetuating loop.
Exactly. It can be so hard to break free from.
It's like our natural instinct when someone hurts us is to hurt them back.
Right.
But then that just keeps the cycle going.
Exactly. And this can play out on such a massive scale.
Yeah.
You know, fueling conflicts between groups, communities, even entire nations.
So how do we break free from this cycle? How do we stop this chain reaction of pain and suffering?
Well, Alston suggests that it starts with understanding. You know, recognizing that violence is often a symptom of deeper issues, like inequality and justice, unresolved trauma.
So it's not enough to just address the surface level aggression. You got to dig deeper and get to the root of the problem.
Exactly. And this is where all those unconventional approaches we talked about earlier come to sports, religion, education. They can all help to break down barriers, foster empathy, create spaces for dialogue and reconciliation. Alston even mentions psychotherapy as a tool for peace building.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. How does therapy fit into all of this?
Well, imagine a community that's been torn apart by conflict. Individuals on both sides are carrying deep emotional wounds. Therapy can provide a safe space for them to process those traumas, work through their anger and grief, and start to heal. And as individuals heal, so too can the community.
Right. It's like that saying, hurt people hurt people. If we can help people to heal their own wounds, they're less likely to inflict pain on others.
Exactly. And Alston points out that this kind of healing can happen on a larger scale too. Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, for example. They provide a platform for victims and perpetrators to share their stories, acknowledge the harm that was done, and begin the process of forgiveness and reconciliation.
It sounds like a long and difficult process, but ultimately a worthwhile one.
It is. And Alston reminds us that there's no quick fix to breaking the cycle of violence. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to engage in those tough conversations. But he also offers a message of hope. He argues that every act of peace, no matter how small, contributes to a larger ripple effect.
So even those everyday acts of kindness, understanding, and forgiveness can make a difference.
Absolutely. Think about it this way. Imagine you have a disagreement with a colleague at work. Instead of getting defensive and escalating the conflict, you take a moment to listen, to try to understand their perspective, and to find a solution that works for both of you. You've just broken a mini cycle of violence.
And who knows, maybe that one act of peace will inspire someone else to do the same, and so on and so on. It's a powerful thought.
It is. And it speaks to the idea that peace is not just the absence of war. It's a way of being, a way of interacting with the world, a commitment to understanding empathy and nonviolence.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into peacemaking, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I think it's that each of us has the power to be a peacemaker. It starts with our own thoughts. our own words, our own actions. By choosing understanding over anger, forgiveness over resentment, and dialogue over violence, we contribute to building a more peaceful world, one interaction at a time.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of peacemaking. We hope it's given you some new insights and inspired you to be a force for peace in your own life.